I'm here in South Hill Park in Berkshire, England, another cold winter's day. We're going to look at number 4 in our series on prophecy, allusions, images, symbols, and we're going to be looking this time at the nations part 1, part 2 next week. And of course the nations do figure prominently in prophecy because they provide the sweep of history, as it were. We are going to look next time at Daniel 2 and so on, but for the moment we're just looking at how God describes the rise and fall of nations and how he knows what is coming up. We have material in Genesis 10 and 12, 1 Samuel, Matthew 20, Revelation 18 and Daniel 7. And there's some good quotes there in the notes for this time relative to the nations and how God is the, how could I say it, the one who's supreme above all of that. John Piper, God is pursuing with omnipotent passion a worldwide purpose of gathering joyful worshippers for himself from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. He has an inexhaustible enthusiasm for the supremacy of his name among the nations. Therefore, let us bring our affections into line with his, and for the sake of his name, let us renounce the quest for worldly comforts and join his global purpose. Thinking very particularly about how God is working through the nations, not always endorsing them. We see some terrible things in the history of nations and what they've done to one another, warlike conquests and persecution and so on. But as we understand the role that different nations have played in history and their influence, particularly in relationship to God, and I want to add, of course, the great controversy, because each one is playing their part for or against the issues in the great controversy. And so I asked some questions there. How does Bible prophecy regarding the nations confirm our confidence in God? Why did God allow such a departure from his ideals and principles by the nations? Was that to teach us something? Were we supposed to learn from that? When nations abandon God, what happens? What do we see? And even when people in the nations endorse God, are they doing it for all the right reasons? And what kind of result comes out? What is our role in all of this today? The Bible summary, look at some of that material there. We have Nimrod there in Genesis, the first tyrant acting in opposition to God. That's probably the first example of an anti-God nation, maybe you could say. In Genesis 12, God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, that particular nation, and wants him to go to the promised land. You have 1 Samuel 8, and that's the very sad story of Israel saying, we don't want God to be our ruler anymore. We want to have a king just like everybody else. And God says, well, when you get a king, he's going to oppress you. He's going to take your men away and as soldiers. He's going to tax you. He's going to take your wealth away and all the rest of that. But they said, no, we still want a king. That's the kind of nation we want to be. And sadly, as they choose to do that, as God allows that, we see that the kings of Israel, many of them are not on God's side. We read there in Kings and Chronicles that this king did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and so on. So there you have the aspects of how the sweep of history described in prophecy illustrates what happens when you choose the devil's way and not God's way. Jesus said, foreign lords lord it over their subjects, and powerful leaders oppress them. You're not meant to be like that, he says. That's the beginning of servant leadership, and he is emphasizing the fact that it's the pagans who act in that way. They're not the ones who follow God. Revelation 18, the fall of Babylon. Daniel 7, the eternal kingdom that is set up and ruled by the Son of Man. So as we think of prophecy, and as I say, next week we'll look at Daniel 2 more specifically about the sweep of history and the empires, let's think about how God is trying to teach us lessons here and now and promises us a wonderful future.